Good morning. Right. See, today we'll discuss about revolutions and counter revolutions. Right. Yesterday's class we have discussed about and we have completed the topic of imperialism and colonialism, and the factors that led to imperialism and colonialism, and the impacts, and as well as imperialism and colonialism in various parts of the world, especially South Asia, Southeast Asia, Latin America, South Africa, and Australia. Right. So for that, I have provided some notes, and additional notes I will provide again. So particularly with respect to the expansion of these colonialism into these areas, and as well as various aspects of new revolution as well, new imperialism. Sorry. So for that, I will provide notes. Right. We'll move on to revolutions and counter revolutions. Say. Aryan, and Garima, with respect to notes, you need to get notes for French Revolution, American Revolution, right? Okay, so regarding this, and after that I have dictated some of the notes and I have given notes, and for any additional topics I will add to this. Okay, so don't worry about that. Just I'm just confirming you. So I thought like you might be worrying about the notes. Everything will be provided. Good morning, Abhay. So I will provide you for everything that has been needed to be given, right? Okay. So as long as I'm there, don't worry. Right. Right. So we'll move on to revolutions and counter revolutions. See, we have already discussed about revolutions. Especially, we have already discussed about the revolutions. That is 1789 and 1776. That is American Revolution and French Revolution. We have already discussed. Okay, and as well as we also discussed about the rise of nationalism, particularly in which led to Italy and Germany. We also discussed about that. That is how revolutions occurred in Italy and Germany, and how they have carried on, and how they resulted in their unification. That is unification of Italy and unification of Germany as well, right? And here it is like we will discuss some of those revolutions and counter revolutions as well. Okay, so right, see, coming to revolutions, see, these revolutions started in 1820s. So we have already mentioned many times, that is 1830 revolution of France, 1848 revolution of France, which were also extended to other parts of Europe, that is especially Central Europe, was greatly impacted by these revolutions which were erupted in France, right? So we'll briefly discuss about them and then we'll move on to various major counter revolutions. See, as I mentioned, particularly French Revolution had great impact on various other nations, especially where the ideas of French Revolution, that is liberty and equality, gradually spread to various other parts of Europe and resulted in various revolutions. So resulted in various revolutions, especially in 1820s, 1830 and 1848. Right. So specifically speaking about 1820, so 1820 revolution occurred in Spain. So especially initially when there was a movement in Spain in 1812, a liberal constitution was granted for Spain. So initially, particularly after Napoleonic wars, particularly after French Revolution, these ideas spread to Spain where there were revolutions occurred. So that resulted in granting of liberal constitution for Spain in 1812 under monarchy. Right. However, King Ferdinand ignored this constitution and failed to implement the constitution effectively. So because of that, because of the ignorance of this liberal constitution which was granted in 1812 to the Spain by their king Ferdinand, that resulted in revolt from people, especially this revolt was carried by military. So it was a militia coup which carried revolt against the nature of which particularly King Ferdinand, who rejected or who ignored the constitution. So it was General Rigo carried this movement. Military general of Spain, that is General Rigo, carried the movement rebelling against the king's attitude and finally resulted in this 1820 revolution, where finally the king submitted and the liberal constitution was restored, and as well as parliamentary government was also accepted, right? So this is the beginning of 1820s revolution, where series of revolutions occurred in various other parts as well, right? So in 1820s revolution greatly mainly occurred in Spain, where the Ferdinand ignored implementation of the liberal constitution which was granted for Spain in 1812. So finally resulted in rebellion, particularly from military, carried by General Rigo. So where they were successful in restoring the liberal constitution. Right. Similarly, in 1821, there was another revolt occurred in Europe. Especially yesterday I have talked about this Eastern question, right? Yesterday I have discussed about Eastern question matter. That is, what is disintegration of Turkish Empire. So this thing we have discussed in yesterday's class. That is disintegration of Turkish Empire. That means the Balkan Peninsula, the Turkish Empire, which has this Balkan Peninsula, which consists of various Balkan states, started dismemberment from the Turkish Empire, started claiming their independence. So that particularly influenced by the various revolutions of Central Europe. So in Eastern Europe also, these revolutions occurred, and these Balkan states started demanding the independence, right? So specifically, this example yesterday I have provided, that is Greeks' war of independence. So specifically in 1821, the Greek war of independence started, especially Greeks who were under Turkish Empire started claiming for independence, right? So they demanded for independence, especially to make this Christian country to get free from the Muslim rule. So obviously these Balkan states who were under Turkish rule or who were under Turkish Empire were Christian countries. So especially Serbs, Albanians, Romanians, Bulgarians, and Greeks, right? So these Greeks started demanding independence and they started their war of independence against the Turkish Empire in 1821. So this is another example of revolution that occurred in 1820s. So especially in this war, see here, particularly in Central Europe, it was a dual attitude of European countries. We'll see here, particularly in the Central Europe, these countries, especially Britain, Austria, Russia, France, these great powers wanted to restore monarchical power, right? So in the Central Europe, where there was a feeling of nationalism arised among the people, so these powerful nations, particularly after Vienna Congress, they wanted to restore the original state system. That is, they wanted to restore the monarchical system, authoritative system in the Central Europe. Whereas coming to the Eastern Europe, when there was a revolution for independence occurred in under Turkish Empire by the Greeks. In fact, these all supported for Greeks independence. They supported for, that means revolution was supported here. So in the Central Europe, these were against the revolutions, but in the Eastern Europe, because the Greeks were Christian country which wanted to get free from Turkish Empire, which is a Muslim ruling empire. So here these great powers supported this revolution of Greeks that started in 1821. So with the support of Britain, France and Russia, finally Greek became victorious against Turkish Empire and finally declared independent in 1829. In 1829 it was declared independent, and as well as finally in 1832 Greece was recognized as a sovereign nation. That is, in 1832 it born as a new nation with sovereign power, right? So in 1820s, this is another example where the revolution started, particularly in Spain and in Greece, particularly in Greece, which was supported by various other Central European powers like Britain, France and Russia, who supported the Greeks independence against Turkish Empire. So finally, with the help of these powers, Greek attained independence in 1829, and finally in 1832 it was declared as a sovereign nation. Okay, so similar kind of revolts gradually spread to other parts: Britain, France, Austria, Russia and so on. So obviously the influence of 1820s revolution also had expanded or extended towards various other parts of Europe, right? So now we'll see 1830 revolution or 1830s revolution, especially we'll speak about 1830 revolution, which is erupted in, so this was also called as July Revolution, so which was erupted in France against, see, obviously you know, particularly Vienna Congress of 1815 removed the liberal government from France and restored it with, that is, parliamentary government was restored with a monarchy, that is, the old ancient regime was restored, right? Old ancient regime was restored in France, so which was ruled by various Bourbon monarchs. So, Bourbon dynasty, and that is under ancient regime, ruled over France again from 1815 as a result of Vienna Congress. So, obviously, again, the revolution, that is the people's revolt or rebellion against the king started particularly in 1820s and reached finally peak in 1830, which we call it as July Revolution. So where the people, that is liberals, agitated against Bourbon monarch Charles V. So obviously, because again in this period, that is from 1815 to 1830, again this France was under the rule of Bourbon monarchs, but that is ancient regime, which was autocratic and absolute, which ignored the rights of people. So this again, this ancient regime, which was restored from 1815, again started ruling in the same lines as before 1789. So people revolted against this Bourbon monarchs, that's particularly Charles V. So especially this rebellion was carried by bourgeois and liberals. So this was mostly the revolt, or this is the mostly revolution of bourgeois against the king Charles V, the Bourbon monarch Charles V. So finally it was successful and Charles V was removed and replaced with a more liberal monarch, that is Louis Philippe. Okay, and as well as various rights were also provided to the people, and particularly on the lines of some of the ideas of French Revolution were again re-implemented in France with constitution, right? So this was 1830 revolution. Obviously, as I already mentioned in our previous classes, this July Revolution of France also had great impact on various other revolutions of the Europe, especially Italy and Germany, right? So in 1830s, we'll speak about another revolution, particularly that occurred in Belgium, because again same Vienna Congress because of the political restoration, because of the reorganization of political map of Europe. So here particularly the question between Holland and Belgium, they were both kept under Kingdom of Netherlands. So that is post 1815 Vienna Congress. So Vienna Congress put the two countries, that is Netherlands and Belgium, under, that is Netherlands and Belgium under a single monarch, that is Kingdom of Netherlands. So due to this, Belgium, so under this Netherlands, so northern part was under this kingdom, northern part was Holland and southern part was Belgium. So that means no sovereign right was given to Belgium, and Belgium was put under a monarch, that put under a kingdom, that is Kingdom of Netherlands. So here also in Belgium, particularly in 1830s, so another revolution or another revolt broke out in Brussels, so which resulted in Belgium's independence. That means after this Brussels revolution, Belgium was liberated from Kingdom of Monarch, others, Kingdom of Netherlands, and finally independence was granted and Belgium was declared as a sovereign nation. Okay, so this was another example of revolutions of 1830, right? So another major revolution that we have to speak about is 1848 revolution. So see, 1830 revolution, that is July revolution, which had impact on others. Similarly 1848 revolution, that is February Revolution again broke out in France, demanding for more liberal rights, demanding for granting of civil liberties. So people of France again revolted against the monarchy. That is what we call it as February Revolution of 1848. So actually 1848 revolution in France was very, very important, because in fact 1848 year was considered as So 1848 year itself was considered as spring of nations in Europe, because in 1848, not just in France, but almost every country which were under monarchs, a revolution broke out in this particular year. So that's why this year was called as spring of revolution. Sorry, spring of nations, because various revolutions broke out in those nations, particularly in 1848, right? So especially we have already spoke about 1848 revolution in France, and as well as this in fact spread to Italy, Germany, right? So 1848 revolution was carried by Mazzini in Italy. Similarly, in Germany, it was broke out as Berlin Revolution or March Revolution, which we call for German unification, right? So this 1848 revolution, which started in France against the monarchy, which greatly expanded to various other parts of Europe, so especially Italy and Germany. So not only Italy and Germany, it also expanded to various other parts like Austria, Hungary, Russia, Sweden, Denmark, and many more. Okay, so that's why this 1848 year was called as spring of nations, because various nations in the Europe saw eruption of various revolutions, especially in 1848. See, obviously French Revolution, the revolution in France in 1848 was a trigger point, but however there was various changes that occurred also contributed to eruption of this revolution, especially in 1848. So particularly, what are those changes? What are the factors that contributed? Increase in nationalism, because by the time we already spoke about nationalism, how it has been greatly spread for over entire Europe, right? And as well as increased industrial revolution, because this is the time period where we saw the first towards it is the end of first phase of industrial revolution. So this industrial revolution brought various changes, like technological changes occurred, scientific revolutions. So with that, societies saw modernization. So these are the various changes that occurred in economy of these countries, which contributed to rise of revolution. So not only economic factors, but also various political factors also, that is especially growth of socialistic ideas, growth of communism, because especially in 1848 only Communist Manifesto was written by Karl Marx and Engels. So obviously Communist Manifesto, which was written by Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, also influenced the people of various countries of Europe, especially in 1848. So these are the various contributors of 1848 revolutions. So these are the factors that led to rise of revolutions in 1848. So obviously, beginning of revolution in France was a trigger point, but it greatly expanded to other parts of Europe, especially in 1848, because of various changes various economic and political changes that were came up in Europe, especially the increase in nationalism. So industrial revolution, obviously industrial revolution resulted in various changes, particularly in the life of peasants and working class, right? And various technological changes brought modernization of society, and as well as rise of various political ideologies such as socialism and communism, which emerged in this time, led to a rise of voice of people in these nations that resulted in revolutions. So particularly these all revolutions happened in 1848. So that's why year of 1848 was called as Spring of Nations, right? So this is all about the revolutions, particularly 1820s, 1830s and 1840s. Okay. So what are the examples that we have seen? So for revolutions, we already spoke about revolutions, that is American Revolution, French Revolution, which were happened in 18th century. But now we're talking about revolutions of 19th century. So that is especially in Europe. So beginning with 1820s and later 1830s and 1840s. In 1820s, the revolutions, so the examples what we have taken, that is revolution in 1820, that is Spain, where the people revolted against King Ferdinand's attitude towards liberal constitution, and finally resulted in a military coup, especially under General Rigo, where they finally succeeded in restoring the constitution. Similarly, in 1821, another revolution broke out in Balkan Peninsula, that is especially Greek, demanding independence from Turkish Empire. Here in this case, in the Eastern Europe, the Greek was supported by various other great powers of Europe, especially Britain, France and Russia, because they saw it as a fight of Christianity against Muslim rule and Muslim intolerant attitude towards these Christian nations, particularly the people of Slav race. So they supported Greek, and finally Greek attained independence in 1829 from Turkish Empire, and in 1832 it was finally declared as a sovereign nation, that is a new nation was born in 1832, right? This is examples of 1830. Similarly, moving to 1830s. So in 1830s, we greatly speak about the revolution of July Revolution of France, which broke out in France against the attitude of Bourbon monarch Charles V. Especially this revolution was carried by bourgeois class and liberals, demanding for various liberal rights, right? So finally they succeeded in removing Charles V and replacing him with more liberal monarch, that is Louis Philippe I. Similarly, another revolt that broke out in 1830s was in Belgium, because post Vienna Congress 1815, Belgium was placed under Kingdom of Netherlands as a southern territory of Netherlands Kingdom, along with Holland as a northern territory. So due to that, obviously fed up with the attitude of Netherlands, Kingdom of Netherlands monarch, so Belgium decided to revolt against this kingdom. Finally, a revolution occurred in Brussels, so which resulted in liberating Belgium from the Kingdom of Netherlands and declaring Belgium as a sovereign nation. So coming to 1840s, so we greatly speak about 1848 revolution, because this is the year where revolution not only broke out in France, but revolutions broke out in various, in fact almost all parts of Europe which were under monarchies, right? So especially that's why this year called as Spring of Nations. So this revolution of revolution of France in 1848 gradually expanded to various nations like Italy, Germany, Austria, Hungary, Denmark, Sweden. These countries faced revolution because of particularly various changes that occurred or occurring in the society, especially economic changes and political changes, such as increasing nationalism, because nationalism already became a common word by that time, where it contributed to rise of voice of people against absolute monarchies. Similarly, this is the time period, particularly in Europe, where industrial revolution occurred. This industrial revolution brought various changes in society, which are both positive changes and as well as negative changes, particularly the impacts that peasant class and working class faced due to industrial revolution, and these issues that were faced by working class and peasant class were not addressed by monarchs, so that led to discontent among the people against absolute monarchs, so that led to revolutions. So similarly, technological changes and scientific revolutions also brought changes in the society, especially towards modernization, which were under modernization, people sought for more freedom. Under modernization, people sought for more liberal rights. So they started demanding or agitating against the monarchs. Similarly, this is also the period of rise of various political ideologies, especially the birth of socialism and the birth of communism gave more voice to the people demanding for more socialistic rights against absolute monarchies. Okay, so these are the various revolutions that were occurred in 1820s, 1830s and 1840s. Okay, clear? Right. See, now we'll see some of the examples of revolutions and counter revolutions. So particularly we'll see revolutions in Russia, Italy, Germany and China. Okay, so we'll discuss them one by one and we'll write the notes accordingly, right? So we'll discuss about Russian Revolution. So when was Russian Revolution occurred? When was Russian Revolution occurred? Yes, 1917. So 1917. In fact, there were two revolutions with respect to Russian Revolution. That is February Revolution and October Revolution. Right. So specifically in 1917, two revolutions broke out in Russia. So especially one revolution in February, call it as February Revolution, and another revolution that occurred in October, which we call it as October Revolution. Right. So tell me, what are the so what led to this revolution? Why this revolution occurred? Why this revolution? What are the causes that led to this revolution? This two-stage revolution? World War One, okay, bhai. And Russia's defeat, okay. Inflation, okay. Human rights violation, right? Human rights violation, okay. Autocratic rule of Tsar, okay, very good. And right, Workers' problem, right? So, revolt from working class, failed development compared to ally like UK, right? No development in Russia during this time, particularly that is particularly because of Tsar's attitude, right? Very good, very good. So we'll discuss them. We'll discuss those points what you have mentioned so far, but we'll discuss in a different way. See, causes. So the causes for this revolution, so the causes are multifold. There was no single cause, as you have mentioned. You yourself have mentioned different diverse causes. So we'll see what these diverse causes contributed finally to a revolution that occurred in 1917, right? See, attitude of monarch. So we'll discuss under different aspects. We'll discuss these different aspects separately. See, coming to the attitude of monarch, that is the Tsar ruler Nicholas II was the monarch of Russian kingdom at that time. So this Nicholas II, in fact, he was weak. He was considered weak and incompetent, and as well as his attitude of brutal suppression of revolts caused discontent among the public, and as well as Nicholas II's decision to participate in World War I on the side of Allies. So that is also one of the reason where people resented against or raised their voice against this Nicholas II's attitude. So as he was weak, incompetent, and he himself was a commander in World War I, failed to acquire any victory for Russia in the World War I, because first 3-4 years of Russia in World War I was very, very disastrous, where it lost various battles, especially battles of Tannenberg, so which impacted Russia not only politically but also economically. So mainly the monarch's attitude and as well as his weak and incompetent attitude, see, is one of the reason for Russia's revolution. Similarly, see, there was another revolution which acted as a precursor for 1917 revolution, that is Russian Revolution of 1905. So there was a small revolution or a small revolt that occurred in Russia against the Tsarist regime, particularly in 1905, which we call it as 1905 Russian Revolution. See, this revolution was broke out as a result of, particularly in 1905, due to various problems, due to particularly problems of the peasants and working class people, started a peaceful agitation. In 1905, they carried a peaceful agitation against the attitude of monarch. So that means they're demanding Nicholas II they were demanding the King Nicholas II to address various issues that were faced by the peasants and working class. So in 1905, in that agitation, they decided to agitate in the capital city, that is St. Petersburg, where monarch resides. So they went to the court of monarch. In fact, the people went to the court of monarch and sat before the court, because people believed that monarch was inside the court, but actually monarch was not available at that time. So the people reached St. Petersburg, reached the court of monarch and sat over there. The mass crowd sat over there agitating for fulfillment of their demands. But as monarch who was outside his court, from outside, without knowing the situation, without knowing the agitation, how it was carried by the people, from outside, he demanded for suppression of attitude, which resulted in police atrocities. So this resulted in police atrocities, where police, on the order of king, they opened fire on the agitating people who were in fact agitating very peacefully. So this resulted in deaths of lot of people, lot of civilians died in this, particularly mostly more than 1,000 people died in this. So that's why this incident was called as Bloody Sunday. And people started agitating against the Nicholas II, calling him as Bloody Nicholas II, right? So this event, that is Bloody Sunday event that occurred, that is opening of fire by the police against a peaceful agitators, resulted in Bloody Sunday, and this in fact angered the entire nation. So because of this, large scale strikes, agitations, protests occurred throughout the Russia, so which we call this as Russian Revolution. Especially it was carried by various sections of the population like peasants, working class, and various socialist and Soviet soldiers, republics. So all came together, all these sections came together and demanding for various changes in the constitution, demanding for implementation of constitution and changes in the government. So finally, this is called as Russian Revolution of 1905. So in fact, this acted as a precursor to 1917 revolution. Okay, so obviously after this Russian Revolution 1905, so various changes were introduced in Russian government, especially Nicholas II introduced, or he promised that he will bring constitution and parliament. So he, after this 1905 revolution, Nicholas II promised that he will bring a constitution and parliament for Russia. So which we call it as October Manifesto of 1905. So the promises of Nicholas II, we call it as October Manifesto, where under October Manifesto he promised for parliament, that is creation of Duma, promised for constitution. So obviously Duma will be formed and later constitution will be adopted. He also promised for granting of civil rights. He also promised for extension of franchise. Okay, and as well as he also promised for abolition of death penalty and many more. Okay, so these are the promises that were given by Nicholas II, that is monarch Nicholas II, under after Russian Revolution 1905. That what we call it as October Manifesto. So obviously under these promises, Duma was established in 1906, and that means the parliamentary government was established under the monarch. So for the first time, Duma was established by the king in 1906. But however, so it didn't work properly in the initial cases. Especially it was dissolved in 1906, again formed in 1907, again it was dissolved, and again formed in 1907, worked till 1912, and again another was formed, worked till 1917. Right. So finally the Duma worked till only 1917. So the initial years, even though the promises that the King Nicholas assured under October Manifesto, he failed to keep his promises initially, because initially the Duma was dissolved immediately after its formation, and as well as it was not represented appropriately, because particularly because it is a parliamentary government, needs to be represented by all the sections of the population. But however, under the influence of king, only few sections dominated this particular parliament. And as well as another changes that occurred after formation of Juma, different political parties came into limelight. So especially different political parties like Constitutional Democratic Party, Socialist Democratic Party, Labour Party. So different parties came into picture and they started claiming representation in Juma, right? So this is one of the factors. So coming to the causes. So after Russian Revolution cause, we'll see another cause, that is economic factor. So as you have already mentioned, so economic factors comes under, that includes problems of peasants and problems of workers. Say peasants, because the inequality with respect to land was great. Inequality with respect to land was very high in Russia at that time. For example, only 1.5% population, only 1.5% population held 25% of land. So because of this inequality, lot of peasants suffered, and in fact Nicholas II did not carry on any land reforms. So no land reforms, that is no land distribution was carried by Nicholas II. So, and as well as peasants suffered from poverty, crop failures, inflation, starvation, and famines. So the peasants faced from various kinds of problems, but these problems were not addressed by Nicholas II, and in fact these problems became aggravated after Russia's participation in World War I. So Russia's participation in World War I greatly impacted, that is the economies of Russia was greatly impacted because of this World War I. So which added to the already existing problems of peasants. So because of that, peasants became discontent, peasants resented against the attitude of Nicholas II. Similarly, workers' conditions were also worse, because this is the phase of industrialization of Russia. So in this phase of industrialization, so obviously due to industrialization, various workers faced problems, especially poor working conditions. They need to work in poor working conditions, lack of sanitation, workers suffered from poverty, very low wages, long working hours. So like these problems are existed among the working class. So the both working class and peasant class both were impacted due to the attitude of Nicholas II, and as well as the participation of Russia in World War I. So these problems aggravated the economic and social issues of Russia, which also acted as one of the cause for Russian Revolution. Right. Similarly, political causes, we'll write separately. Similarly, coming to political, so obviously political causes were, that is One thing is Russia's defeat in Russia-Japanese War 1905. So in fact, which damaged the prestige of Russia politically. So that is defeat of Russia in Russia-Japanese War. So obviously here also people blamed Nicholas II's approach in this war, right? Similarly, the beginning of World War I was a disaster for Russia. So as it was turned disaster for Russia, people agitated, people resented against Nicholas II and as well as his attitude, his command of the troops, and as well as his approach in the war, because they blamed Nicholas II for Russia's defeat in the war because of lack of reforms that he implemented, because of lack of modernization, because of lack of industrialization, particularly in manufacturing of weapons, lack of effective measures in transport and communications. So as these factors led to Russia's failure or Russia's poor performance in the World War I, obviously impacted the political prestige of Russia, right? So these various factors like the attitude of monarch, that is weak and incompetent attitude. Similarly, the Russian Revolution of 1905, where the police forces of king opened fire against a peaceful agitation of people in St. Petersburg, especially who were led by peasants and working class, which resulted in Bloody Sunday. So due to that Bloody Sunday, that resulted in an agitation all over Russia, which we call it as 1905 Russian Revolution, where different sections of population participated and agitated against the Tsar regime. Similarly, so obviously in that revolution he promised October Manifesto, but he failed to implement it in appropriately. So that also one of the factor. Similarly, economic factors, especially the various aspects of economy of Russia were affected due to the approach of Tsar regime and as well as Russia's participation in World War, which resulted in various problems that particularly faced by peasant and working class. Similarly, political factors, especially Russia's prestige politically has been damaged due to their loss in Russia-Japanese War in 1905 and as well as initial disastrous defeat for Russia in the World War I, which is especially due to Tsar's attitude, that is Nicholas II's attitude, and as well as his approach in the war and his decision to participate in the war, and as well as Russia's conditions also did not suited for participation in the war because of less manufacturing of arms and ammunition, less industrialization as compared to other allied powers, more problems as compared to allied power, especially social and economic problems already faced by Russia, and as well as the approach of Nicholas II in dealing the World War I was utterly failure, which impacted Russia greatly, especially politically, right? So, and at the same time, apart from this, obviously, there are also certain factors where the royal family was accused of various scandals, especially murder of prime minister. So the regime, that is Tsar regime, also faced various accusations of scandals. See, all these resulted in Russian Revolution in 1917, right? So obviously the Russian Revolution occurred in 1917, that is during the time of World War I. Okay, so particularly after 4 years of World War I, this Russian Revolution occurred in 1917 in two stages. that is one in February and other in October, right? See, here I have mentioned that during the 1905 revolution, after the formation of parliament, that is Duma, different parties came into limelight. So here especially Social Democrat Party played a major role. Okay, so Social Democratic Party became one of the major parties in Russia at that time. So actually, which later divided into two sections: Bolsheviks and Mensheviks. So who are Bolsheviks and who? Actually, initially they were both part of Socialist Democratic Party, but later, because of ideological differences, they got separated as Bolsheviks, that is majority, and Mensheviks, that is minority. So Bolsheviks were on the side of peasants, Mensheviks on the side of workers. So that is Mensheviks wanted to carry the revolution with proletariat, and Bolsheviks wanted to carry out the revolution with peasants. Okay, so this is the split of Socialist Party into Bolsheviks and Mensheviks. See why I am mentioning this, because they both played a major role in these two revolutions. Okay, see, so as these problems were aggravated, particularly the problems among peasants and working class, so this resulted in agitation in February. So this is what we call it as February Revolution. So especially in February 1917, in fact, this movement was initially carried by women. Women from peasant class, women from working class, women from other sections started this agitation. So they came out of homes, they came out of their offices, they came out of their factories and started revolting and started rebelling, agitating against. They started agitating against monarchical rule, because already the common class already facing a lot of sufferings, particularly due to the approach of Tsar regime and as well as due to Russia's participation and the economic impacts in World War I. So finally that culminated in 1917 February Revolution, where women from different sections came forward, came out of their homes and started agitating against the monarchical rule, with slogans like bread, down with aristocracy, and slogan like stop war. Okay, so these are the slogans that were carried by women, that is slogan of bread, slogan of down with aristocracy, and slogan of stopping a war, right? So obviously gradually later 90,000 women from entire Russia joined this agitation, and within next day another 150,000 people from both men and women now joined the agitation. So within 3-4 days the agitation became more and more intense, and it was spread to all parts of the, not just St. Petersburg, but all parts of the Russia. So now obviously Nicholas II ordered his forces to suppress the revolt. So as the agitation was going day by day, Nicholas II, that is monarch, the king, finally decided to suppress the revolt through force, and he ordered his troops to suppress the agitators through force, so which resulted in police brutalities in many places. Especially they opened fire on people. So however, as the people's attitude towards king was very, very negative. And here, particularly in this February agitation, in fact, some of the people were also joined by police. So some of the military troops who were ordered to fire against the people were now started joining the troops and fighting against the police. So that means now not only common people, that is not only peasants, workers, liberals, now some of the military troops also joined the agitators. So now the movement was carried by the normal common people, the peasant class, working class, various liberal class, socialists, and military class. So these different sections started joined together and carried the movement. So as soon as the military, which was so far on the side of state, joined the people, so obviously it cannot be suppressed. Right. So as it cannot be suppressed, the Duma, which was carrying its session, that is the parliament which was carrying its session during this agitation, decided to remove Nicholas II. Right. So because as the agitation was difficult to be suppressed with force, that and Duma, which consists of more liberals, finally decided that, or believed that the movement cannot be brought under order, the movement cannot be controlled as long as Nicholas II was in his position. So it can be controlled only after overthrowing Nicholas II. So they wanted Nicholas II to resign. So in fact, initially they did not wanted to overthrow or remove the monarchical position, but they wanted Nicholas II to resign from his position. So they expected that Nicholas II will resign from his position for his minor son Alexis. So the Duma thought that if Nicholas II resigns, he will be replaced by his minor son Alexis, and obviously the minor son will be ruled with the help of a regent. So obviously the condition of Russia can be restored. But however, Nicholas II resigned instead of Alexis, he resigned for his brother, that is Michael. So it was an unexpected move which was not expected by the Duma. So now Duma pressurized Michael to not to accept the position of monarch. So finally Nicholas II was resigned and the Duma pressurized Michael to not to accept the position. So with that, monarchy was abolished. With that, monarchy was finally abolished from Russia because no successor, and Nicholas II was overthrown from the empire, and Michael was pressurized to not to accept the position. So with this, monarchy was removed, and this monarchy was replaced by a provisional government. Okay, so in 1917, in February, so the monarchy was overthrown and the monarchy was replaced by a provisional government, right? So now this provisional government became, so now we can speak of the period of provisional government from February to October 1917. So till 1917 February, it was the monarchical rule, where from February, so it was the provisional government rule. See, at this time, there was two groups, particularly the Duma, which formed as a provisional government to rule Russia after overthrowing monarch, right? So initially there were two contenders. So there were two contenders. So who are they? One is Duma, which consists of mostly upper classes and middle classes, whereas there is another section Petrograd Soviets, which consists of workers and soldiers. So these were predominantly Mensheviks. So these were predominantly Mensheviks. So after overthrowing the monarchy from his position, and which needs to be replaced by a provisional government. So for this provisional government, there were two contenders for making provisional government to form. So who are those two contenders? One is Duma, which is already existing, which consisted of upper class and middle class, whereas the other section was Petrograd Soviets, which consists of working and soldier class. So, and Petrograd Soviets was mostly led by Mensheviks, not Bolsheviks actually. It was led by Mensheviks. So actually these Petrograd Soviets wanted to carry a large-scale revolution in Russia, because to replace with a socialist regime, that is to replace the Russian government with socialist regime. So that means both had different ideologies. So this was mostly represented by bourgeois class, and this was represented by working class. So this was represented by bourgeois class, and this was represented by mostly proletariat class. So, and this proletariat class wanted to utilize this situation and wanted to carry a large scale all Russian agitation, all Russian revolution, and to replace the government with socialistic government, right? But however, in fact, initially in 1917, this Petrograd Soviet finally decided to cooperate with Duma. Because they also believed that at this point of time, Russia was not economically strong enough to carry a socialistic revolution, right? So as they felt that in this time, as Russia was already suffering from a lot of economic issues, so they decided that Russia was not strong enough at this point of time to carry a large-scale socialistic revolution. So they decided to cooperate with Duma, because they felt that this revolution, particularly the February Revolution, was a revolution of bourgeois against the monarchy. So they decided to cooperate with Duma, and finally provisional government was formed. Clear? So with the cooperation between two ideologically different groups, that is upper class bourgeois and working class proletariat, so they decided to cooperate with each other, and finally a provisional government was formed in February 1917 after overthrowing this monarchy, that is Nicholas II, right? So, but however, people expected a lot. Obviously, as the monarchy was overthrown and it was replaced by a provisional government with more liberals, so obviously people will expect more reforms from this provisional government, right? But however, they succeeded in granting some, and they failed to bring some reforms in some other aspects. So we'll see what are those. So as soon as they came to power, as soon as the provisional government was formed, they agreed that this provisional government will form Constant Assembly for framing a new constitution for Russia. And as well as it granted civil liberties. It granted civil liberties for people. It abolished death penalty. It abolished death penalty. It also removed racial and religious discriminations. That is, religious freedom was given, right? It also provided or allowed political prisoners to come back from exile. So who were fled to exile during the time of revolution, so they allowed the political prisoners to come back from exile, right? So these are the various reforms they introduced, and let us say what are those reforms they failed to address. Particularly, Russia was not withdrawn from World War I. So people expected that provisional government will decide to withdraw Russia from World War I. But however, the provisional government continued with World War I, because provisional government thought that, in fact, by this time, after the formation of provisional government in February, all the allied powers recognized provisional government as the official government of Russia, and provisional government felt that it has the responsibility to fulfill the promises that it was given to allied powers. So to fulfill or to honor those promises, provisional government wanted to continue Russia in the World War I, right? Similarly, they did not carry land reforms. They did not. People expected that, particularly peasant class expected that as soon as provisional government was formed, that they expected this provisional government would carry land reforms which would help the cause of peasants, right? So land reforms were not implemented. Russia was not withdrawn from World War I, and as well as economy of Russia also not properly addressed. So that means economic issues not addressed properly. That means especially the issues of inflation, issues of dependence on others for imports, issues of starvation, issues of crop failures, famines. So these issues were not properly addressed by this provisional government. So due to this partial success and partial failures, obviously the provisional government lost support from people. So the provisional government lost support from people, which gave rise to another revolution, particularly that is October Revolution of 1917. We'll see how that revolution was occurred. October Revolution of 1917. Right? So, how this October Revolution occurred? So, obviously, just now we have seen some of the drawbacks of the Mensheviks, some of the drawbacks of provisional government, which was led by both Mensheviks and mostly Duma, right? That is upper class. See, now, as I said, this provisional government gave permission for those political prisoners who were in exile to come back to Russia. So, obviously, that resulted in comeback of Lenin, who was in exile in Switzerland. So, this made Lenin to come back to Russia. So, Lenin belongs to Bolsheviks. So Lenin was the leader of Bolsheviks who fled to exile in Switzerland during the time of revolution. So finally came back to Russia after the formation of this provisional government. Right, in February, Lenin was allowed back to Russia. So obviously, as Lenin came back to Russia, again the situations has been greatly changed. Right. So we'll see what are those situations that greatly changed after Lenin's return, and as well as how he carried the revolution from February to October. See, as I already mentioned, Bolsheviks and Mensheviks had differences with each other because Mensheviks were the ones who wanted to carry the movement with the help of workers, where Bolsheviks wanted to carry the movement with the help of peasants. So they wanted to address more issues of peasants, and Mensheviks addressing the issues of more working class. So particularly after coming back of Lenin, so he wanted to strengthen first Bolsheviks. So he took various measures to strengthen Bolsheviks because already people were fed up with, or people were dissatisfied with the provisional government because of their failures to introduce reforms. So Lenin wanted to utilize this as an opportunity to strengthen his Bolshevik party, right? So obviously now Lenin, to strengthen the Bolshevik party, he started propagating his programs, he started propagating his principles to attract people. So in fact, particularly he ran a newspaper called Pravda. So through that newspaper, he started promoting his principles, promoting the principles of Bolsheviks, promoting the program and approaches of Bolsheviks. That is, these approaches, how to help Russia, and mostly peasants and workers. So he started propagating, he started promoting his programs and approaches and principles of Bolsheviks through the newspaper Pravda to attract different sections of the population, that is both peasant class, working class, and later he also wanted to attract soldiers as well. So that means he wanted to bring those Mensheviks who are supporting the Duma, who are supporting the provisional government, to bring them back to his side, that is to the side of Bolsheviks. So obviously he was succeeded. So this propaganda is called as April thesis, where through the newspaper of Pravda he started publishing these principles and approaches and programs of Bolsheviks under 10 themes. So obviously, which this attracted a lot of public. So now this the people's eyes turned towards Lenin, who wanted to bring reforms which will help the people of Russia, and in fact they wanted to have true liberty, because even the provisional government replaced the monarchy, but the attitude of provisional government was more or less it like a monarchy only. Okay, so there was no change. There was only a change in the government politically, but there was no change greatly in the attitude of this government as expected by the people. So now as Lenin came to Russia and he started propagating his ideology, that is Bolsheviks, programs, principles and approaches to save Russia from various problems, and he propagated that through his general newspaper, that is Pravda, in the name of 10 themes. So it greatly attracted, gradually peasants were attracted, workers were attracted, and as well as later military, the soldiers were also get attracted to this Bolsheviks, and particularly Lenin. Now Lenin was seen as a hero for Russia, right? And also he carried or conducted All Russia Soviet Conference in March and declared the slogan of this conference as all powers for Soviets, all powers to the Soviets. So this conference was carried. That means here Soviets means the general public, like the peasants, workers, soldiers. Okay, not aristocratic class, not the upper class, not the bourgeois. So in March he conducted or he convened a conference, that is All Russian Soviet Conference or All Russian Soviet Congress, so which was convened in March in St. Petersburg, and declared the slogan, that is all powers to the Soviets, all powers to the Soviets. That means so now all the powers of Russian government will be given to or will be put in the hands of the common people or the common classes, that is peasant class, working class, and soldier class. So these two, that is April thesis and as well as this conference of the slogan all power to the Soviets, greatly attracted lot of people from different sections towards Bolsheviks. And he also tried to gather support from Mensheviks as well. So he called to Mensheviks, particularly the Mensheviks, that is Petrograd Soviet. So as I said, that is, as I already mentioned priorly, that is Petrograd Soviet, which is predominantly dominated by Mensheviks. So he started asking for support of Petrograd Soviet to Bolsheviks, so that now he also asking for support from Mensheviks as well, right? That is especially Petrograd Soviet, where the majority was for Mensheviks. So now he is attracting the common masses, particularly people from different sections, that is peasant sections, worker sections, and soldier sections. And as well as now he started asking support from Petrograd Soviet, which were actually dominated by Mensheviks, right? And similarly, he also started attracting military as well, because now he approached to military, because military of Russia was also already suffering in the World War I. So Russia already faced a lot of disastrous defeat in World War I. Lot of people sacrificed their lives, especially soldiers sacrificed their lives, and in fact they were fed up with the approach of Nicholas II so far. So Bolsheviks, particularly Lenin, used that also as an opportunity and started attracting military towards Bolsheviks. So finally military also turned towards Bolsheviks. So now he got the support from peasants class, he got the support from working class, he got the support from the voluntary soldier class, and now he got the support from military class as well. That is royal military, royal troops also started supporting Bolsheviks. That is Lenin, right? So now in July, as the support for Bolsheviks was greatly expanded, Lenin decided that, so it is the time for him to start an agitation. It is time for to start a revolution against provisional government and to replace that provisional government with a true people's government, right? A true Soviet government. So in July, he conducted an agitation. So in July 1917, so the Bolsheviks carried an agitation, especially Tauride Palace in St. Petersburg, where there was meeting was convened between Duma and Petrograd Soviet. So in July in Tauride Palace, so there was a meeting which was supposed to happen between Duma and Petrograd Soviet. So during this meeting, Bolsheviks surrounded Tauride Palace and started agitating. So, but however, the Petrograd Soviet did not take any responsibility because they cleared that they were not supporting the Bolsheviks because Petrograd Soviet, as I already mentioned, was dominated by Mensheviks by that time. So they did not taken any responsibility of this agitation. So obviously the provincial government declared Bolsheviks as illegal and declared Lenin as spy of Germany, so who wanted to bring chaos to the country. So in fact, this was a big jolt to Bolsheviks. So as Lenin expected it as an opportunity, but this opportunity turned out to be a disaster for the Bolsheviks because from now Bolsheviks was declared illegal by the parliament, that is provisional government, and as well as the provisional government also accused the Bolsheviks for carrying a revolution which is not suitable for the public. So Bolsheviks faced a problem, particularly in the July revolution. So also lost the support from some of the sections of the population, right? So again, Lenin decided that so the time was not ripe yet to carry a mass large-scale revolution to overthrow provisional government, right? So gradually again he restored back, and Lenin was also declared illegal, and also they declared to imprison Lenin, and finally Lenin fled away to Finland. So that is again Russia, again Lenin, who was in Russia, now went back to exile in Finland, right? But however, as the war is going on, there was also discontent among the people started against the provisional government, and as well as the discontent among the military against the provisional government also gradually helped Lenin in the later cases as well, right? Particularly Kornilov affair, or we can say Kornilov issue. See, at this time, in September 1917, Prime Minister Alexander Kerensky appointed Kornilov as Commander-in-Chief, right? So Alexander Kerensky, Prime Minister appointed Kornilov as Commander-in-Chief during this war. But obviously initially the terms between Kerensky and Kornilov was good, but gradually the terms between Kerensky and Kornilov became bitter, and Kerensky accused Kornilov that he was trying to overthrow provincial government through a military coup and wanted to replace the liberal government with military dictatorship. So the commander-in-chief Kornilov, so Kerensky accused Kornilov that Kornilov wanted to overthrow the provincial government through a military coup and wanted to replace the provincial government with a military dictatorship. Obviously, it will also become autocratic. So, however, Kornilov denied those accusations. So, but Kerensky, who was feared of Kornilov's military coup, now wanted to take support from Bolsheviks. He wanted to take support from Bolsheviks. So, obviously, he called upon Lenin to support Kerensky against the military coup of Kornilov. Obviously, there was no military coup that happened ever, but obviously, it was expected by Kerensky that Kornilov may carry a military coup, which will overthrow the government and replace with military dictatorship. So now he wanted to take the support of Lenin. So he called upon Lenin and Bolsheviks to support the cause of Kerensky. So that means, again, the Bolsheviks who lost the prestige in the July coup finally got another opportunity directly from Kerensky, right? So now again, Lenin, who came back to Russia, wanted to use this opportunity to carry a large-scale mass revolution in Russia, right? So this opportunity was greatly utilized by Lenin, who carried the movement, who carried the revolution with the help of different sections of the population, and finally overthrown the provincial government, and this provincial government was replaced by a Soviet government or new provisional government, that is, which we call it as Soviet government, which also will act as Constituent Assembly to frame a new constitution. And obviously, with the formation of this Soviet government, Lenin was declared as its president. That means the era of Lenin begins. So this was Russian Revolution. That is two stages of Russian Revolution. That is February Revolution and October Revolution. Okay. So these are the series of events that led to Russian Revolution. And immediately after Soviet government was formed, he took up various measures, that is to peace measures, land reforms, reforms in economy, reforms in industries were carried by Lenin, right? So these are this is all about Russian Revolution. Clear? Okay. So shall I give notes for this, or shall we discuss another revolution? Okay. So right. So Russian Revolution is clear for you? Right? Okay. Then we'll discuss about another revolution. Okay, so we'll discuss about another revolution, that is fascist counter revolution of Italy. Okay, so counter revolution because it happened after Italian unification. So, and as well as fascism that was evolved, or how it was started in Italy and how it was carried by its leader, we'll see, and obviously how it has been ended. Okay, say, tell me, what is this fascism? What is this fascism, and how and who led it? Okay, okay, no problem, no problem. See, we have discussed about Italian unification, right? So we have discussed about Italian unification, how it has happened, and particularly Italian unification culminated by 1870, right? So in 1870, Italy was unified and born as a new nation, right? And obviously monarchy was overthrown and a liberal government was established. So that is parliamentary government was established in Italy. So which from 1870 carried various economic and political changes that occurred in Italy, right? See, so particularly here we are speaking about again World War One situation only, because this happened during World War One only, and particularly post World War One. See, fascist counter revolution, this particularly beginning of Italian fascist party. So beginning of Italian fascist party under Benito Mussolini. So this Italian fascist party was founded by Benito Mussolini in 1919, and in fact he was the one who led this fascist party, and the ideology of fascism was implemented in Italy, which was carried by him till Second World War, that is 1945, right? So he came to power in 1923 and was in power till 1945, finally where he was overthrown by the Allied powers of Second World War One. See, the reasons. So the reasons for emergence of Benito Mussolini and his fascist party. See, because let us see those reasons actually. So here particularly we are discussing about fascist counter revolution in Italy. So, and this fascist movement was carried by Italian fascist party, which was founded by Mussolini, who came to power and implemented this fascism in Italy, in fact which brought various changes and as well as various problems to Italy, which was finally overthrown in 1945. So, and but we'll see first how Mussolini came to power, or how this Italian fascist party came to power, right? So we'll see those causes one by one. So why Mussolini came to power? See, the World War One, which was ended in 1918, obviously Italy was a party, or Italy was a party to World War One. That means Italy participated in World War One on the side of Allied powers. So Italy participated as a party in the Allied powers. And post World War I, these Allied powers under Treaty of Versailles promised that Italy will be given certain territories after World War I, right? So, but however, so as I mentioned that after World War I, so Italy was promised by other Allied powers that certain territories will be given to Italy, that is under promise of Treaty of Versailles. But however, those territories which were promised by the Allied powers were not completely given. So only out of promised territories, only 4 territories were granted to Italy, whereas other territories were granted to Yugoslavia. So this was one of the reasons where people lost their trust in other parliamentary parties. Okay, so this was one reason. Another reason is parliamentary government. People lost trust in parliamentary government because of the instability and indecisiveness of this parliamentary government, because as particularly post 1870, when the monarchy was removed and it was declared and a parliamentary government was established, this led to rise of various political parties. So political parties were that much more that no political party had absolute majority in the parliament. So every time coalition governments were formed, particularly I'm talking from the time period of 1919 to 22. So particularly from 1919 to 1922, so in fact it was completely coalition governments. In fact, in the span of 3 years, 5 governments have been changed. So in the span of 3 years, 5 governments have been changed, which brought instability to the parliament and indecisiveness to the parliament. So obviously, the parliamentary type of system also lost support from the people, because people were fed up with changing governments in the parliament, right? Similarly, another cause was economic problems faced by Italy due to its participation in World War I. So obviously same kind of problems that we have seen in the Russian case. So here also Italy faced various economic problems, especially problems like unemployment, inflation, shortage of food, problems faced by peasant class, problems of working class. So these problems are out of result of Italy's participation in World War I, right? Similarly, various socialist movements because of the problems, because of the emergence of these problems, various socialist movements also continued to arise. So these communists and socialists carried various strikes and agitations throughout from 1919 to 21. A lot of strikes, mass and large scale strikes were carried by these socialists and communists in Italy, also disrupted the basic public order. So this is also one of the reasons where people lost support in the present government. Right. So similarly, another cause was rising popularity of Mussolini. So Mussolini was also his popularity was also rose, particularly in the span of these 3 years, particularly among different sections. So we'll see how his popularity has been rose. See, as I already mentioned, Mussolini was the one who set up Italian fascist party. So in 1919, he set up his own party, Italian fascist party. See, in fact, Mussolini was initially a part of socialist group. Initially, he was a part of socialist group. So, he started his party with some Republican and socialist program. Okay, so his party is mainly based on, the program is mainly based on Republican socialistic ideology, right? And he was anti-monarchy, anti-church, and anti-big business. So you may think, why I am specifically mentioning the ideology of his party, because you need to know the ideology of party, then only you need to understand the fascism. So Mussolini, who set up his party in 1919, that is new party, Italian Fascist Party. Initially this party was started with Republican and socialistic program with an ideology of anti-monarchical, anti-church, and anti-business. So that means he was a true socialist. He was a true socialist in 1919. So, but what happened in 1919? He participated in parliamentary elections. But he failed to secure no seat. In the parliament. So that means he was rejected by various classes. So that led to change of his approach. So now from 1920, he changed his party's ideology. So as I said, he was anti-monarchical, anti-church, and anti-big business. But now he changed the ideology of his party and started taking the cause of private business and industrialists. So that means he changed his ideology and now he started supporting private property, he started supporting private business, and he started supporting wealthy classes. So this support attracted support from wealthy and business classes towards fascist party. Right? He also gave speeches to attract Catholics. So that means he also attracted Catholics. He also dropped Republican from his party ideology. He also dropped the program of Republican program from his party's program. Right? Party's ideology dropped the program of Republican, which was actually started with the program of Republican and Socialist. So by 1922, what happened? Mussolini, who started his party as an extreme left, completely transformed into extreme right. So instead of, as he started his career as an extreme leftist, now completely became extreme rightist. See, it's not the matter, the ideology doesn't matter here. What matters here is coming back to power. Because with the initial ideology, as he was rejected by the people and he failed to perform in the 1919 elections, he completely changed his attitude. He wanted to attract the other sections, that is wealthy class sections, business class sections, industrialist section, Catholic section. So he started changing the programs of his party and he adopted those programs which were against socialistic ideas, against communistic ideas, and finally attracted those class. And in 1922, he fared somewhat better in the elections and secured 35 seats. So he secured out from 0 in 1919 to 35 in 1922 elections. Okay, so with this, the popularity of Mussolini among wealthy sections, among the private sections, among the business class, among the industrialists, and among the church, the Catholics, greatly rose. So that means now Mussolini put forward himself as savior of Italy from communists. Right? So obviously now two sections, that is one section is supporting Mussolini and other section is socialistic sections. Even though he was initially socialist, but he completely changed his attitude. Right? So here in 1922 elections, we're discussing about the causes for rise of Mussolini power, right? Yes. So Mussolini's popularity, and another cause is, another reason for his power rise is, that is lack of effective opposition as well. So another reason for rise of Mussolini power is lack of effective opposition, because opposition, that is especially the communists, failed to anti-Mussolini or anti-fascist groups failed to come together to control Mussolini's power. So obviously, as they failed to come together, so it led to divisions among them. So lack of effective opposition also helped Mussolini to acquire more and more power. Right? So, but we'll see the course of events and emergence of fascists. See, as I told you, in 1922, so in the parliamentary elections, Mussolini, that is his party, that is fascist, got 35 seats, but however, more seats were secured by socialists. So more seats were secured by socialists. So, but however, socialist coalition government has to be formed by socialists. So this socialist has to secure support from nationalists, right? So obviously the socialists here, they did not wanted to form government, they did not wanted to support the nationalists. So especially now the nationalists called for fascist. So obviously, which is not enough for not the seats were not enough to form the government, and the socialists did not wanted to support either of them. They declared a revolution. They declared a general strike. They declared a general strike in 1922 against the attitude of present government. So instead of forming the government, so they denied to form the government and they declared a mass, large-scale general strike all over Italy. So as the strike was declared by these communists, nationalists, that is the sitting Prime Minister Giolitti called for support of fascists. So he called for support from Mussolini, and now Mussolini wanted to take charge of the power, and he decided to carry the revolution, that is March to Rome, which we call it as March to Rome. That is, he wanted to capture or occupy various cities, including Rome, to capture the power. So actually there was a strike announced by the socialists, that is general strike. So using that situation, using that chaotic situation as an opportunity, Mussolini wanted to acquire power, and he decided to launch an agitation, launch a revolution with the help of his voluntary army, which we call it as black shirt squads. So with the help of his voluntary army, with the help of his private army, the black shirt squad, so he decided to march on to Rome. So obviously the king Victor Emmanuel, instead of suppressing the revolutionary movement of Mussolini, instead of suppressing it, instead of declaring an emergency, he called upon Mussolini to form the government. Right? So that means Emmanuel III, that is king himself, gave an opportunity for Mussolini to form the government in 1923. So as Mussolini declared a march on to Rome, so that he wanted to make use of this situation as an opportunity, and wanted to carry a military coup with the help of his own private army, that is black shirt squad. So finally King Victor Emmanuel, instead of declaring emergency, instead of suppressing the Mussolini's expansionary activities, he called Mussolini to form the government. So a new government was formed with fascist party as the leader. So this is the beginning of fascist party rule in Italy, right? So from 1923 we see the beginning of fascist party rule in Italy, right? We'll see how Mussolini carried his power. So this is the beginning of fascism in Italy, so which was continued from 1923 to 1945. This is the period of fascism in Italy. So this is the period of fascism in Italy. See, initially, as we are in the crisis situation, so king in fact gave more powers to Mussolini, because here as the socialists were carrying a large scale general strike all over Italy, so even King Victor Emmanuel wanted to control the situation. So to control the situation, he gave more power to Mussolini. More power to Mussolini was granted by king. That means Mussolini can take decisions for next 4 years without concurrence of parliament. So that means particularly not 4 years, for 1 year. So up to end of 1923 we can say. So up to end of 1923, Mussolini will have a complete power to control the crisis. These are special powers which were granted by the monarch, that is King Victor Emmanuel. So obviously this is the beginning of the autocratic rule of Benito Mussolini in Italy, which actually the true ideology of fascism has been implemented. So he carried on various changes in the government so to strengthen his regime. So as I mentioned, the king granted Mussolini with special powers to control the crisis till end of 1923. That means more than 1 year span was given to Mussolini. So that means autocratic, that is despotic rule was implemented. So let us see what he did with that power. So what he did, the squad, that is the black shirt squad, which was the private squad of Mussolini, this squad was legalized. This squad was legalized. He also brought changes in parliament. He also brought changes in parliament that the PM, he brought a provision that PM was not responsible to parliament but only responsible to king. So that means he brought a change in parliamentary provisions that from now onwards, from 1923 onwards, PM will not be responsible for any of his actions to the parliament. He will only responsible to king only, right? Similarly, he also brought changes in elections. So especially he reduced the franchise. That means the voting rights were reduced. So he increased the property clause for voting rights. So that means he increased the property class. Because why he increased it? Because he was getting support from wealthy class only. So what he did, he removed voting rights from general sections and he increased the requirement of property. So voting right voters has been reduced to 3 million from 7 million. So almost more than half of the voters were removed, right? And he also used violence and intimidation to overthrow other parties. So he removed various other opposition parties through violence and intimidation. That means to make or to ensure no opposition. Ensure no opposition. So that means to make Italy as one party system. He wanted to make Italy as a one party system, right? So similarly, he also introduced various changes in education system as well. So education system in the lines of fascism. So he changed education on fascist lines. So how he changed? In fact, he brought discipline to the schools and colleges, especially. So he introduced uniforms for the teachers. And apart from that, most importantly, fascism was introduced into the syllabus of schools and colleges. Fascism was introduced into the syllabus of schools and colleges, where children were taught about fascism. So they also conducted various organizations and groups to attract children of different ages to join fascism. So for that purpose, a particular organization, that is Sons of the Wolf, was organized to attract children, especially right from the age of 6 years, into fascism. So especially an organization was set up, that is Sons of the Wolf, or an organization which attracted children of lower ages, children from schools and colleges to join fascism. Right. Similarly, he also made a treaty with Pope. See, as I already mentioned, initially he started his party as anti-church, right? So initially when he was extreme left, he started his party as anti-church, but gradually, as I already mentioned, that after the failure of 1919 elections, by 1992, he completely became extreme right, and he started gaining support from Catholics by giving various conciliatory speeches towards Catholics. So, after getting into power, he also made a treaty with Pope, that is Treaty of Lateran in 1929. So what is this treaty? So this treaty is nothing but giving Pope more individual powers and freedom. See, so far Rome was part of, finally in the final defeat of France in the Franco-Prussian War in 1870, Rome became part of Italy, right? So, but Rome is directly under the government rule. So what, under this Treaty of Lateran 1929, that is the Mussolini made this treaty with Pope. So this treaty is that Pope will be given more individual powers and freedom. That means Vatican City was declared as a sovereign territory. So it was actually declared by Mussolini. So now also it was a sovereign territory. So Vatican City was declared as a sovereign territory, and Pope will have complete sovereign authority over Vatican City, and the government, that is Italian government, will not involve in the affairs of Vatican City, that is Pope. And as well as Italy was also declared as, that is Christianity declared as state religion. So Christianity, Italy declared as a religious state with Christianity, and Pope also agreed to not to interfere in government affairs. So this was the treaty between Mussolini and Pope, that is Treaty of Lateran 1929, which declares that Vatican City as a sovereign territory, and over that sovereign territory Pope will have complete authority in those affairs, and Italian government will not interfere in those affairs. Similarly, Pope will not interfere in the government affairs of Italy, and as well as Italy was also declared as a religious state, that is with Christianity as a state religion. So this was another measure of Mussolini to attract Catholics, right? And as well as to make his power more supreme, to avoid Pope's interference in the affairs of Italy, right? Similarly, he adopted policies of propaganda and policy of censorship. So because obviously propaganda means he set up various leagues, local branches, and various organizations, various groups all over the Italy to propagate about fascism. To propagate about fascism. He also censored, he also put various censor restrictions various newspapers and press, particularly who are condemning the fascist ideologies. So, through both propaganda and through both censorship, he popularized the fascist regime. He wanted to popularize the fascist principles and ideologies. Especially, he organized various local branches, groups, and various organizations to inculcate fascist values and fascist culture among all public. So he did that in educational institutions and he did that in general as well, right? So, and as well as racial approach. His racial approach. Say, even though it is a fascist regime, he was not as racial as compared to Hitler. So Hitler, who was highly racial in nature, who wanted to discriminate between Aryans and non-Aryans, who wanted to proclaim himself as the supreme race among the world. But however, it is not with the case of Mussolini. Mussolini initially he was not racial. Initially he was not racial. So he allowed all other races like Jews and others to exist in the Italy. So he was not hostile towards any other race, at least till 1938. At least till 1938, because in 1938 he changed his attitude towards Jews because of his influence or more association with Hitler and Nazi party. So, particular till 1938, he was not implemented. He was not against any other races, particularly Jews. But from 1938, with increasing influence of Mussolini with Hitler and his Nazi party, he started racial policies. Particularly, he started implementing various anti-Jew laws. So, in fact, it was a surprise for the people because he suddenly started becoming anti-Jews because of his more inclination or more association with Nazi party and their leader Hitler. Particularly after certain pacts like Anti-Comintern Pact, Pact of Steel, Rome-Berlin Axis. So these are the certain pacts, so which brought Mussolini and Hitler close to each other. So where Mussolini replicated some of the policies of Nazi Hitler, right? Okay, Aryan, okay. Thank you. Right, so with this, by 1930s, Mussolini's power gradually rose to that extent that he became autocratic. So that's why we're calling it as counter-revolution, because so revolution, this gradually, that revolution, particularly in Italy, which made Italy free from the monarch, particularly, and led to Italian unification, and where more liberal parliamentary government was established. But now that parliamentary government was replaced by another autocratic ruler in the form of Mussolini and his fascist regime. Right? So how he became autocratic? So, right. So obviously he started his career in 1922, and initially with the special privileges that he got from the king, that is to control the special powers to control the crisis, particularly the crisis caused by communist So from that time period, he strengthened his position. That is, he organized or legalized his own private army. That is, Black Shirt Squad was legalized, and the parliament, he brought various changes in parliament. That is, he made prime minister responsible only to king and not to the parliament. And he also brought changes in elections by reducing the voting to make more supporters for himself. So he increased the property qualification for voters, so which greatly reduced the voters. Obviously these voters will support Mussolini now, right? Similarly, he also removed all the opposing forces. He also removed all the opposition parties through violence and intimidation. So finally, as there was no opposition, so there was only one party, that is only one fascist party existing in Italy in 1930s. So multi-party parliament system has been converted into one party system, autocratic system, right? And he also strengthened his power by popularizing his ideology, by bringing some changes in education system. So especially he brought changes in education. He changed the syllabus. He introduced the syllabus of fascist ideologies into the syllabus of school and college education. He also organized various groups and organizations in the school to popularize the ideology of fascism and to attract more and more children into fascism. So particularly one organization, Sons of Wolf, attracted such children into fascism. Similarly, he also made an alliance with Pope to ensure that Pope not to interfere in the government affairs of the Italy. So they made a treaty called Treaty of Lateran in 1929, which granted Pope more freedom and more sovereign rights by making Vatican City as a sovereign state. And also Pope was restricted to interfere in the internal affairs of the Italian government. And as well as Italy was declared as a Christian state. Similarly, he also used propaganda and censorship, propaganda for popularizing or propagating or promoting his fascist ideologies, fascist principles and fascist programs throughout the Italy. Especially he organized various local branches of fascist party. He organized various groups and sections which popularized the fascist regime among the people, right? Similarly, he also, though he was initially non-racial, but from 1938 he became more racial, particularly with his increasing association with Hitler and Nazi party. He introduced various anti-Jew laws which condemned the Jews in Italy, right? So this is by 1938. So not only 1938, by 1930s itself, he became more and more powerful, and finally his autocratic rule was strengthened. His autocratic rule was strengthened greatly. So, and by this time, so Italian population, entire Italy was under a fascist regime, which is a totalitarian regime, right? So Italy came under fascist regime. So there was no parliamentary government. So there was only one regime, that is fascist regime. So no parliamentary government, no other parties, no elections. So it was completely, the entire Italy was under the control of one monarch, that is Benito Mussolini, right? So we'll say, what are the characteristics of fascist regime? So obviously, to say it as autocratic rule, so we need to know the characteristics of fascism. So what are the characteristics of fascism? What are the characteristics of fascism? No? At least you can say from the explanation what we have carried so far. Stable and authoritarian government. So, because one characteristic was stable and authoritarian government. So, why it is stable? Because in the parliamentary system, because of multiple parties, only coalition governments were formed, and these coalition governments were unstable. So, but here under fascism, a stable government will be provided to the people, and that government is authoritarian government, right? So another characteristic was extreme nationalism. Say Nazism and fascism both were terms of extreme nationalism. That means the nationalism which started in the earlier stages, which is different from this nationalism, because this is extreme nationalism, that is putting country at first rather than individual. That means obviously when country is put at first, so there will be no individual choices, no individual rights, right? No individual liberties. Okay, so we can say that this can lead to rejection of individualism and more emphasis on state. So extreme nationalism means there is rejection of individualism and more emphasis on the authority of or the primacy of state. So what does that mean? So individual is not important, the state was important. So there will be no individual preference. The preference was given to the choice of the nation rather than choice of a individual. That means we can say less democratic. So it is very, very less democratic. Right. So other characteristics: one party system. So another characteristics of fascism was one party system, right? So obviously, as I already mentioned, so there was only one party at this time, that is only fascist party, and only one ruler, that is Benito Mussolini. So all the other parties all the opposition parties were removed through violence and intimidation, right? Elitism. So another characteristic was elitism. So that means more preference with the wealthy class, more preference to wealthy class. So obviously, as we already discussed, that he from extreme left turned to extreme right and gradually got into power with the support of wealthy sections. Another characteristic was anti-communism. So this fascism was against communism. So obviously the movement, obviously fascist movement, that is March on Rome, obviously started against communistic general strike. So it was completely against communistic ideology, because obviously even though Mussolini, who was more tend towards socialistic ideas initially, but gradually he changed into right wing, and he was again from then onwards he was against communism. Another characteristic was totalitarianism. So totalitarianism means completely everything will be controlled by the state. So everything will be controlled by the state. That means every aspect of the government, every aspect of life of people will be government controlled. So as I already mentioned, there will be no individual liberty. militarism. So everything will be controlled through military, through force. So military will be strengthened, and this military will be used in control of various aspects of the government and as well as society. And another aspect, corporatism. So another characteristic was corporatism. That means, so the government will be divided into various sections or various corporates, so which will be in fact headed by an officer which is appointed by the government. Okay, so in every cadre, in every level, there will be no elections or nothing. So everything will be in a corporate form. So where each wing will be appointed an officer who is direct representative of the government, right? Another characteristic was radicalism. So another characteristic was radicalism. Here radicalism means, don't think this radicalism as left radicalism, but this is right radicalism. That is implementation of right approach through violence, right? So radicalism. Use of propaganda. So already I mentioned propaganda was greatly used to promote the ideologies, to make sure the principles and programs of fascism greatly reach to the people, so that people will get attracted towards fascist regime, right? So these are the various characteristics of fascism under Mussolini. So what are they? So stable and authoritarian government, extreme nationalism, rejection of individualism, and more emphasis on, or more primacy to the state, one party system, elitism, so anti-communism, totalitarianism, militarism, corporatism, radicalism, use of propaganda, and you can also say economic self-sufficiency. Economic self-sufficiency, right? So these are the various characteristics of fascism under Mussolini from the time period of 1923 to 1945. Okay, so but we also need to know how far Mussolini was successful and how far he was a failure. So we also need to know how far away, because during the coup, during the time of communist strike in 1922, he promised to the people that he is the one who saves Italy from communism. So we should know whether he fulfilled the promise or not. Obviously, apart from fulfillment of promise, but he became an autocratic ruler in Italy. So who brought the control of Italy entirely under him, right? But we'll see how far he was successful. He introduced stable government. Yes, it was a success of Mussolini, because initially we have seen the coalition governments which were unstable, especially from 1919 to 1922. In the span of 3 years, we have saw that there were 5 governments that were changed, right? So Mussolini, as he came to power, he introduced stability in the government and provided stable government or stable rule to the public, right? So another success, he was successful in bringing self-sufficiency in food production, because we already saw that agitations that or the revolutions that occurred in 1919 because of the economic effects of World War I on Italy. Right. So obviously, as he came to power, he brought various changes to strengthen the economy of Italy. So especially he focused on enhancing the food production and to reduce the import dependency. So finally, he was succeeded in bringing self-sufficiency in food production. So with that, economy of Italy got stabilized. So he gradually brought various reforms in the economy, and obviously finally by 1930, so economy of Italy has been stabilized, right? He was also successful in encouraging industry. So because obviously you know already that he was industry class were the ones who initially supported Mussolini. So he brought various measures right from his role, right from the beginning, to support the industrial class, to support the wealthy class. So he brought various reforms in industrialization, which led to rise of industries. So Italy became industrialized one, especially under him, right? Next, another aspect of his success was battle for lira. So battle for lira means, so it was the currency of Italy. So he strengthened the currency of Italy, especially he revalued. So he revalued the lira against pound sterling. So especially revalued, not devalued, revalued. He strengthened the value of, in fact, lira value was brought to 90 from 150. So, but however, it later on it impacted the exports of Italy, which was one of the failure of this. But however, he strengthened the currency of Italy under him, right? Similarly, another measure was battle for wheat. So especially within agriculture, he emphasized more on wheat production, because by that time Italy was dependent on imports for wheat. So he focused more on wheat to increase wheat production. So due to his reforms, Italy became self-sufficient in wheat production. So this is another measure, obviously, which brought some positive results for Mussolini, right? Similarly, battle for births. So it is also another measure introduced by Mussolini, especially to increase the birth rate, so that population of Italy, which is actually low as compared to other European nations. So he introduced a policy that is battle for birth, which it wanted to increase the birth rate so that population of Italy could be increased, which could stand among the European nations. Okay. So another success was his program of land reclamation. So he brought various lands which are left fallow, which are left waste. So these wastelands and fallow lands were brought under agriculture. So these lands were turned into agriculture lands, which in turn developed, or which in turn contributed to the growth of agriculture, right? Similarly, he also carried various public works. So especially in these 20 years under Mussolini, public works were greatly carried in Italy. So especially laying of roads, railway lines, strengthening of various transport and communications, setting up of various industries. So public works also were greatly succeeded under Mussolini, right? Similarly, He was also succeeded in his foreign policy, so where Italy was made as an important power in international affairs, especially through foreign policy of Mussolini. Right. So these are the some of the successes which made Mussolini power strong. So especially he introduced the stable government. So he brought self-sufficient in food production. He also stabilized the economy of Italy through various economic reforms and measures. He also supported the industrialist cause to enhance or to increase the industries in Italy or to strengthen the industries in Italy. He also revalued the Italian currency lira against pound sterling. He also emphasized more on wheat production. So particularly on the battle for wheat. So he emphasized more on wheat production to make Italy self-sufficient in wheat production. Similarly, he battled for births. That means he also brought various reforms and measures to increase the birth rate in Italy so that population of Italy can be increased, which is low as compared to other nations. Right. Similarly, he also took various measures for land reclamation, especially a lot of fallow lands, a lot of wastelands were brought under agriculture, brought under cultivation, which further contributed to growth of food production. Similarly, he carried various public works, especially construction of railways, construction of railway lines, roads, and as well as strengthening the transportation network, which further helped in Italian economy. Similarly, his foreign policy made Italy as a strong power in the international affairs. Okay, so these are various success of Mussolini under his fascist regime. So we'll see what are the drawbacks. Limitations under Mussolini. See, obviously, as I already mentioned, the currency revaluation of lira, so especially it greatly affected, obviously, what will happen if the currency was revalued? So obviously it makes exports expensive. So obviously it made exports very, very expensive, which impacted the economy of Italy. Similarly, problem of shortage of raw materials, particularly in 1930s, was not appropriately addressed by him. So the problem of shortage of raw materials for various industries, so he did not succeeded in resolving such problem for procurement of raw materials from various territories, which impacted the Italian industries, right? Similarly, his program Battle for Wheat was, even though it was initially succeeded, but it was not a great success because it eventually led to failure and failed to make Italy as a self-sufficient, particularly in 1940s. So Battle for Wheat was proved to be a problem for Italian economy, right? And another impact that he faced, particularly after Great Depression of 1929. So this Great Depression impacted not only the other nations, also it also impacted Italian economy, and more or less inefficient, corrupt regime. So as the regime became autocratic, so a lot of officials under this autocratic rule started became inefficient and resorted to corruption, which affected the lives of various common people, right? So, but obviously, the major reason was, as in 1938, he became anti-Jews, which brought sectional divisions, and as well as another problem of his rule was participation in Second World War, siding with Germany, so which greatly impacted Italy of his siding with Germany in the Second World War, which is a disastrous mistake. In fact, we can consider this is a disastrous decision of Mussolini to support Germany in the Second World War. So obviously, by this time, Mussolini lost public trust. So gradually, by 1942, public also turned against Mussolini, and because particularly Italy faced series of defeats in World War II, also damaged the prestige of Italy, and as well as with these defeats, with this series of defeats, that is, one thing is participation of Italy on the side of Germany in World War II, and series of defeats by Italy in the World War II, lost Mussolini's support from people, and as well as finally Mussolini was arrested and killed in 1945, and the fascist regime was overthrown, and finally a republic government was established in 1945, right? So this is all about fascism, and that is fascist party and the role of Mussolini, so which is an autocratic rule which held in Italy from 1923 to 1945, where finally the Allied powers overthrown Italian fascist regime. Okay, so that was the final verdict on Italy. Clear? Clear? Garima and Abhay, are you there? Okay, so this is all about Russian Revolution and fascist counter-revolution in Italy. Okay, so we are left with Nazi Germany, that is fascist Nazi revolution, and as well as Chinese revolution, that we'll discuss in the tomorrow's class. Okay, right? Thank you. Thank you.